Okay, we are here on Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website, www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Tonight on the program, we will have the continuation of our interview with Councilmember David O. to discuss the recently released special report on the Department of Human Services child separation policy. We will discuss this week's budget hearings, in particular, the property assessing hearing, which happened on Monday. We've been hearing a lot from listeners and readers about the property assessment. So we're going to talk a little bit about that at the top of the show. And our own Lance Haber will take us through the ballot questions for next week's primary. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. Enjoying the spring weather, almost summer, I should say.
Yeah. It's been great weather lately, all week really, but that was dampened for a lot of people by what happened on Monday, and it was very interesting how this kind of took shape. So we knew for a while now that property assessments would be released Monday, May 9th. That had been publicized by the administration. Coincidentally, or perhaps not so, that was the day the Office of Property Assessment was scheduled to testify before City Council regarding their fiscal year 2023 budget. So in real time, on Monday, you had council members questioning the Office of Property Assessment while also fielding complaints from their constituents about the new assessments, and saying to OPA, we're being told we let this happen. What do we tell our constituents? And I have to tell you, I feel like every budget hearing is interesting in its own way. And this one was particularly interesting because you had this very real, palpable sense of concern and anger, let's be perfectly honest, from council members directed at OPA saying, why is this happening? What happened is citywide, property owners saw their assessments go up by an average of 31%. And that is not what anybody wanted to see, particularly now. And we saw City Council have to say to OPA, why is this happening? We didn't expect this. We knew anytime you do an assessment, it's going to go up, and that's just how it is. And you can't necessarily.
Let me stop you there, Larry. That's really not the way it's supposed to work. So those of us who follow property values know that the market goes up and the market goes down. And markets have bubbles and the bubbles burst. And so in the history of Philadelphia property, there have been downturns. There have been years when the property values have fallen by 20 or 30%. And what the city does, unfortunately, is take advantage of the rising prices, but it never reduces the prices when the market falls because it's not in the city's interest to do that.
Right.
And that's really at the crux of the issue. The reason why council people are hearing from their constituents is in every other part of the state, reassessments are supposed to be what's called revenue neutral, meaning that if the assessment increases property values, the county is supposed to lower the rate at which those properties are taxed. Here in Philadelphia, Mayor Kenny isn't doing that. He's not proposing that. What he's really proposing is a backdoor tax increase. He's holding the tax rate, the millage rate, what the level we're going to be taxed at, constant. And then he's going to allow this body, which nobody knows who they are, nobody knows how they function, and they're not accountable to anybody, to increase property values by 31%, meaning he's going to get, Mayor Kenny, unless he's challenged by council and by the communities, he's going to get a 31% tax increase. And that's on top of him sitting on over $500 million in the stimulus money that's still there, that they're not spending. So this increase, this backdoor increase, one, isn't needed. Two, is incredibly unfair. And three, what the mayor is proposing is what the business community has been trying to do for the last 30 years, and that is to lower the wage tax by increasing the property taxes. And what that means is if you make $250,000 or more, you win. If you make $250,000, if you own a house and you make $250,000 or more, you win. You get a tax reduction. If you own a house and you make less than $250,000 under this formula, you're going to lose. You're going to end up paying more taxes. The one study that the administration and the business community always point to is the study that was done at the University of Pennsylvania, the Inman study, which says job losses have to do with the wage tax. Now that study's been disproven time and time again. It's incredibly old, and we're in a very different economy than we were when that study was done. So I think that's why council people are hearing it. It's not inevitable. It's not something that has to happen. It's not an act of God like a flood or a hurricane. It's a concrete proposal by the mayor to get a backdoor tax increase, which he then is going to try and force through by saying, well, I'm going to give you a wage tax cut. And I think that's really the crux of the issue.
And, that in itself is problematic, the wage tax cut. There's all kinds of issues with how that's going to work out. But this is concerning for a number of reasons, which you just mentioned, Lance, but also, in order to see what your assessment is, you have to, if you wanted to know right now, you'd have to go online. And there is a website, property.phila.gov, where you can go and look these things up. And I recommend you do, because you want to know what that number is going to be. And there's also an appeal process that we're going to talk about. And just so people know, in this week's newsletter, and then if not next week, definitely the week after on the show, we're going to try to have somebody from the administration come on and talk to us about this, so we understand it better. We've been getting emails from people asking, like, what are we doing about this? So if you have questions, email us and let us know what you'd like us to ask. And we have a lot of questions as well. But, there's also the concern that if you're somebody who doesn't have internet access, or you don't feel comfortable using a computer, you're not going to know what your assessment is until it's mailed to you. And we don't know when that's going to be, because there's a couple issues there. One of which is a shortage on envelopes, which I didn't know was happening, but apparently that's a real thing. And OPA isn't sure when they're going to get these out to people. And then if it goes out over the summer into the early fall, you only have until October to appeal. So you may not have a lot of time here to make that appeal. So we're going to do everything we can to get people to know what's going on and find this information out. The first thing you can do, and I want to give this number out now, because we'll give it out a couple of times throughout the show. If you have questions about your reassessment, you can call the OPA hotline at 215-686-9200. That's 215-686-9200. And they have a staffed hotline. That's that number for people to call and connect with an operator and answer questions and be able to figure out more of what's going on and what their next steps can be. One of the questions that council member now at council on Monday, I think every council member just about had something to say about this, and there weren't a lot of answers necessarily that satisfied the council members, because the process by which these assessments are created, it's kind of opaque. We really don't know the algorithm, the process, who's doing what. And we've had a lot of problems with this in the past. In years past, assessments have been wildly inaccurate. They've been all over the place. Council asked, hey, are you sure this one's better? And like, and the office of OPA was like, yes, they're better. Well, how? Well, we're within standards and practices, and city council's like, yes, but how do we know that? You know?
And, and there's an additional problem. We should be very clear about this. Rising real estate taxes is one of the things that push longtime residents out of their neighborhood. So here in my neighborhood, I live in the Hawthorne neighborhood. Our community group had a meeting Tuesday night and discussed it. And here's what some of the older residents are saying. You know, we got organized. We formed town watches. We formed a neighborhood group. We helped shut down some of the problems in housing. We got police on bicycles here. We got our neighborhood into a much better shape. We fought for a park. We have jazz concerts in the park. We have movie nights. We have all these wonderful things that are going on that people who have been struggling for 20 years to make it happen are now being told, well, thank you very much for improving your neighborhood. Here's your reward. We're going to push you out. And so these people are saying, how is this fair to us? We did what the city asked us to do. We formed the town watches. We went and complained to our neighbors who were selling drugs. We fought to make sure that the inappropriate housing was closed down, fought for affordable housing. And now our reward for doing everything we were asked to do is to see our property taxes go up to a point where we can't afford them. And for many of the people in my neighborhood, they're middle class. They make $40,000 or $50,000 a year. So they're not going to qualify for any of the programs.
Can you tell us about Loop really quick, Lance, and how?
Right. So what OPA points to is they say there are a number of programs to help people. And one of the programs they point to is the Loop program. And that's for a long time, people who've been in the neighborhood for a long time, at least 10 years. But we don't know how many people actually qualify because the qualifications are so horrible that most people will not get in. So for example, not only do you have to be exceedingly poor to qualify, but your property tax assessment has to go up over 50%. So if the average in my neighborhood or in anybody's neighborhood is 31%, none of those people are going to qualify. And many people are working poor or working middle class people. They're not desperately poor. They make more than $18,000 a year. So they're not going to qualify for any of these programs. The only program that most people qualify for is what's called the homestead program. And if our listeners haven't applied for that, they should. This is a way of discounting how much you pay in taxes. So I'm just going to put out a number. The homestead exemption is now $45,000. If your house is worth $100,000, you deduct $45,000 from that, and you pay the tax rate on the remaining $65,000. So that has some progressiveness to it. The more your house is worth, the smallest percentage discount you get. Someone who lives in $1 million home, the $45,000 homestead deduction isn't much. If you live in a $100,000 home, the $45,000 homestead deduction is 45% of your property taxes. So that is a program everyone should make use of. And one of the things we're not sure of, because OPA and the administration won't talk about it, is how many people actually get it and why do they make it so that people have to apply? Yeah. Why don't they automatically give it to everybody who's a homeowner who lives in their property? They know who the homeowners are living in the property. If your tax bill and your water bill has your name on it, it's mailed to your address, you're a resident.
Yeah.
But again, the mayor and the administration don't want to do that because they're hoping people don't use the program because that increases their tax revenue and it gives them political cover. So this is really something that has to do with a mayor who doesn't have the backbone to stand up to say, I want a tax increase. Instead, he says, well, it's not me, it's the assessments that are going up. And it's not me, it's that people don't apply for the homestead exemption. When, of course, it is the mayor and the administration. and they're failing to have real leadership.
Yeah, and we're, you put all these hoops for people to jump through, and some people may not even know about these things. Some people may not know about the homestead exemption
Right.
because
The easiest way to know that is we know there are roughly 525,000 homes in the city. We know that from water bills. We know that from gas bills. We know that from tax rolls. How many homestead exemptions are there? It's a real easy thing to find out. If the administration, if OPA, the office of that's supposed to be in charge of this, was concerned when they testified in city council, they would have said, we have 95% of the people eligible enrolled. They would have bragged about it. But because they don't want people to have that discount, they rather have the increased revenues, so they're not responsible for spending our money wisely, they won't tell us how many people qualify.
Yeah.
And the loop program's the same. They say, well, they say to people in my neighborhood and people like me who are complaining, they say, well, don't complain. There's a program for you. And they won't tell us how many people actually are in the program, and they will not honestly discuss how impossible it is for people to get into these programs.
Right. And then one of the other things that came up, I think almost every council member asked, hey, what are we going to do about this? And one thing that I think raised a little bit of ire from Councilmember Derek Green was the city had kind of put out some ideas about how they were going to, different things they could do. Like one thing, for example, was the homestead exemption, taking it up to $65,000. That's something that they're considering. And Councilmember Green said, well, wait a second. You were supposed to talk to us about that before you did this. We were going to have those discussions, and you didn't do that. And they're just like, well, these were just ideas. And Councilmember Green said, yes, but again, the ideas should come through us because we agreed to that. And then before you know it, the administration basically said, yeah, this is what we're probably going to do. And it's like, well, but again, you didn't consult with anybody. So there are all kinds of issues with what happened on Monday. And people have a right to be upset about this for sure. And we're gonna spend a lot of time on this in the coming weeks because we think it's really important. I want to give you that number again. So everybody who feels like they should call can. It's 215-686-9200. 215-686-9200. And that's the Office of Property Assessment if you have questions about your new assessment. And like I said, we're going to talk a lot more about this. So Lance.
And don't be shy. Call your council person and say, what are you doing? Why do you want to force people who struggle to make our neighborhood better? Why do you want to force us out? Town watch, group meetings, get rid of the bad residents, close down the drug houses, save the green space. We did exactly what we were asked to do without getting paid. And now our reward is to have to pay higher taxes because our neighborhood's now better. We're being punished for improving our neighborhood, as opposed to we should be getting citations. City council and the mayor should be giving us certificates saying, great job, good. The one saving grace for the city's budget problems, for its pension problems, and for its other problems is to grow our population. And the better our neighborhoods, the more we put in, the more desirable we make the city for people to move in, the less burden there is on taxes for the pensions and everything else. So we're really, those of us who are joining Town Watch and our neighborhood groups and improving our neighborhoods, we're doing a public service, and we shouldn't be punished for it.
That's right. So Lance, next week is the primary election, and this is being talked about in terms of the candidates everywhere, but we're going to take a little different focus this week. We're going to talk about the ballot questions.
Right, and there are 4 ballot questions, and I'm going to get my computer, hopefully, to agree to put it up. Right, there we go. So I'm starting with ballot question 2 because there are 4 questions. Number 2, 3, and 4 really are not controversial. So I'm going to go through them very quickly, and then we'll talk about the controversial one. It doesn't matter how you're registered to vote. You can be Democrat, Republican, Independent, a minor party, when on primary day you can vote on the ballots. So ballot question 2 asks a simple question: should the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter be amended to remove all gender-based references? So instead of saying he will, it's going to be changed so it's no longer a male pronoun. Seems like a real easy thing to know. I'm not sure there's any reason to vote against it, but it has to be a ballot question to change the wording in the Home Rule Charter. Question number 3 is, should the educational supplement, the part that deals with the school district, to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter be amended to remove all gender-based references? Again, same question. Should we take out the he's and make it gender neutral? And it doesn't seem to me to be a particularly contentious issue, but it is a necessary legal issue. Same thing is true for the 4th question. And the 4th question is, should we move the Fair Housing Commission into the charter? As it is now, the Fair Housing Commission was set up by an executive order, and technically a mayor can come in and say, I don't want to have a Fair Housing Commission anymore. And that would do away with all the protections that tenants have against discrimination and against unlivable conditions. So ballot question 4 just asks the simple question: should the Housing Commission become part of the charter, and therefore the next mayor or whoever comes next can eliminate it? It's been the Housing Commission's been around for more than 20 years, does a great job. Again, I don't believe that this is a particularly contentious issue. So those are questions 2, 3, and 4. I have yet to find anybody, the Inquirer, progressives, conservatives, anybody who reputable, who is writing, who recommends a no on any of these questions. On the first question, question 1, this is a question that people have differences of opinions. And this is a question that has to do with the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And for those of us who don't know, this is the body that makes decisions on whether people can get variances. So if someone wants to build something and they can't do it but what's called by right, meaning they don't have an automatic legal right to build there, they have to get a variance. They have to, if they want to change the sidewalk, if they want a curb cut, if they want to have a deck roof, all of these things that need variances go before the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The charter change would expand the number of people from 5 to 7 and would make sure that the people who are on the Zoning Commission the Board of Adjustment have qualifications, and would require the mayor to appoint them, but council to confirm them. So as it stands now, all 5 members are appointed by the mayor, and there's no confirmation needed. I would suggest that not a single one of us listening today have any idea who's on the zoning board and don't know how they got there. And unfortunately, that's probably true for many of the city council people, because they don't have any role in it. There are no requirements. So it doesn't matter whether you're a professional, a neighborhood person, a real estate lawyer, a developer. Anyone can be appointed, and once you're appointed by the mayor, there's no confirmation, so nobody gets to look at your qualifications and question it. And under the Kenney administration, this has been made very clear, because Mayor Kenney appointed a chiropractor to be the chair of the Zoning Commission. I'm sorry, the Zoning Board of Adjustment. I keep calling it a commission, but it's really a board. Now, the chiropractor was active in his neighborhood group, but his major claim was that he was friendly with John Doherty, who was the head of the electricians union who supported Mayor Kenney. Now, the chiropractor had no experience, as far as we know, with development in any other part of the city, and had no ties to anybody else. But more importantly, he was there and then resigned when he found out he was being investigated for stealing from a nonprofit. And after he resigned, he pled guilty and went to jail. And the Inquirer wrote the following story. And this is directly from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Quote, Johnny Doc ally who led Philadelphia zoning board sentenced to more than a year in prison for nonprofit theft. Mayor Kenny appointed Mullen, who's the chiropractor, in February 2016 to lead the zoning board, a 5-member panel that plays a vital role in shaping city development and that grants exceptions to building restrictions. But Mullen resigned the post 9 months later after his connection to the FBI probe of Doherty became known. Now, there is not a single thing that any member of city council could legally do about this, because the way it's now done under the Home Rule Charter, they don't confirm any of these members. They didn't get a chance to ask, what are your qualifications? You know, how did you get the job? What do you think about neighborhood control of development? None of those things were allowed. And the charter change that's being proposed would allow that to happen. So the charter change, if approved, would increase the numbers from 5 to 7. City council members would vote to confirm the members. And the members have to be qualified. It would have to be 1, an urban planner, 2, an architect, a lawyer with zoning experience, a person with experience in the construction industry, and at least 2 people recognized in the communities. So this, to me, seems like something that would be an advantage and also better government. No, you would have checks and balances. You would have some way of ensuring that what the Inquirer reported about less than 2 years ago doesn't happen again, and that there would be some protection that the people on the zoning board would be professionals. Now, it is true that when we talk about professionals, that raises some other problems, but we're not going to talk about that right now. So who's against this? Who is against this? And the answer, surprisingly enough, is the Philadelphia Inquirer is against it. Even though they exposed that Mayor Kenny's previous chair stepped down because he was being investigated and was a felon, they're saying that they don't want to interfere with the mayor's right to put whoever he wants, whenever he wants to, on the zoning board of adjustment. And they're saying that they're concerned that if council has any say, that there'll be too much community control and that council will get in the way of what developers want to do. And while I appreciate that, I think that's really the crux of the issue. How much control over our neighborhoods should we have? Should the developers be able to, behind closed doors, in front of people who we don't know who they are and have no accountability to us, get with permission to do whatever they want? Or should we be able to hold our council people responsible for putting people on the board that are going to help shape our neighborhood? So, for example, in many neighborhoods, the question of parking comes up. And some of the developers don't want to put in many parking spaces. And some neighborhoods say that's fine. But in other neighborhoods where public transit, where SEPTA is not convenient, doesn't run often, or there are other difficulties, say we can't do without cars. And we don't want to see another 500 parking cars trying to park in our neighborhood because there's not enough space as it is. My neighborhood, for example, is concerned about the height limit. We don't want things out of scale. The height limit here is 4 stories. We had a developer who tried to build a 34-story project. Now, it was stopped, but our neighborhood says we want to keep the neighborhood feel. We don't want projects out of sorts. And we feel much more comfortable with having some control, some public control, public say in who's on the zoning board of adjustment, rather than being all secretive. You can understand from the Inquirer's point of view, they don't want the public involved. They think that the public gets in the way of the Inquirer's expertise, and they don't want these changes. And it's up for people to decide whether they want more control over what happens in their neighborhood, or they think that we should leave it all to the mayor to privately put on whoever his campaign supporters ask him to put on, and risk what happened 2 years ago with a chiropractor who was stealing from nonprofits being in charge of development throughout the city. And those are the ballot questions. Again, 2, 3, and 4, very straightforward. Change the gender in the charter so it's gender neutral. For 2, change the charter so it's gender neutral when it comes to education. For 3, 4 is to take the existing commission and make it permanent. And the first question is the contentious one, which is, do we want to have members of the Zoning Board of Adjustment confirmed in a public setting, or should they all be able to happen in private? And that's really what we're voting on.
All right. Lance, thank you so much. You are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM and on our website, www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Now, what we'd like to do is play for you the continuation of last week's interview with Councilmember David O. And this is us discussing with David O. the recently released special report on the Department of Human Services child separation policy. And we also talk a little budget. So here's the rest of that interview.
No child is harmed in this manner.
So can you walk us through some of the recommendations for how the reporting process could change?
Well, first, over-reporting is the big problem. And what I mean is, if, as DHS says, more is better, even if you don't have reasonable suspicion, even what they're saying is, if I look at you and I get a funny sense about who you are, or I have a suspicion, though I cannot explain it, I should report it to DHS. And under certain circumstances, like if I report it on Childline for suspected child abuse, they must investigate. And even when they determine that the allegations are unfounded, children are removed and they are placed into foster care and subject to all kinds of things. When they're put in foster care, for example, they're not necessarily in the same school district. They can be put out of county, so now they got a new school to go to. They not surprisingly become depressed, become anxious. Sometimes in several of the cases, without the parents' consent, their children are now being medicated, with, through doctor's orders. As they act out, they are punished. Sometimes there isn't a place to put them, so they are placed in delinquent facilities with juvenile delinquents. These are dependent kids. They've done nothing, to break the law or anything like that. So I, one of the first things is reports should articulate what is the basis of reporting. What is the reasonable suspicion that a child is subject to abuse? Not simply that, the parents are poor or somebody just lost their job and they got kicked out of their apartment and they're living over at a friend's house or a cousin's house. Worse than that, Pennsylvania has anonymous reporting, where while it sounds like a good thing, we don't want to reveal the person so we can get a good report. But simply when I say anonymous reporting, the person's identity, of course, is not revealed, but neither is the reason why there's a complaint. And that should be revealed. A person should be told, we received an anonymous complaint that you are beating your child, or whatever the case is. And the reason while we're investigating is this, and this. We do not have a basis of evidence to present reasonable suspicion, but we are required under the state law to follow up, something like that. Or they could say, here is the reasonable suspicion. Here are the grounds. It is also true that for people who are familiar with, they weaponize calling DHS. They do it to attack people. And they can just call anonymously and report 30 times that this person is abusing their child. This person is And DHS keeps a record of that. It's unfounded, there's no reasonable suspicion. And even in cases where it's proven to be false, they have a record of that as well, under the idea that there are no reports that are unworthwhile, and that there is no false reporting, that somehow if you accumulate enough reports, there is smoke and there must be fire. All of these things are a violation of the law. And so when you're looking for a needle in a haystack, you don't want to keep increasing the size of that haystack. So how it works is that what they're saying is report or else. And so people are reporting and reporting and reporting. And it's like me pulling the fire alarm every time I get a sense there might be a fire, though I have no evidence. That is not good, because you're sending out the fire engine to every false alarm, and yet there are fires where they need to go. And so we end up with the situation where children are removed from perfectly good homes. A lot of expense is spent on this whole process. The parents are subjected to all kinds of problems. But at the same time, we have children that have presented evidence or reasonable suspicion of abuse that never get investigated and are not getting help. So over-reporting is a serious problem. I think also that the registries are another problem, because as stated in the report, we have cases where someone is alleged, there's an allegation against a person, and they are put in a child abuse registry. They have not, there's been no process to determine that what the evidence is. And in cases where the child has been returned because the allegations are unfounded, the person remains, unbeknownst to them, on a sexual abuser registry, where when it is found out by their employer or where they try to get another job, they are unable to get that job. And there's no distinction. You may be, for example, listed on a child abuse registry because you were convicted of assaulting a child. Or you may be on that registry because someone put you on there because you couldn't explain why you missed a doctor's appointment. There's no grading, and there should be a differentiation between criminal, serious, not serious, missed an appointment, but made it the next time. In other words, there are also, for example, because it's so vague, when a child misses school, some teachers report it as, child abuse, because they're going to report anything and everything to protect themselves from losing their license or being, removed from teaching or whatever it is. And so those standards have to be made clear. There's also, unfortunately, children who cannot speak for themselves. They're old, they're 15, they're 16, they don't get a chance to speak for themselves. They were able to make a statement at the very beginning of this case. That may clear out a lot of cases. A lot of cases would be unfounded. The children are saying this never happened, nothing, this statement is false, but they cannot testify. They are not able to testify. They have someone speaking for them. And once again, very unclear whether that person is disagreeing with the child who is able to understand the facts and speak for themselves, whether they will not state what the child wants. I want to go home. And their child advocate says, no, you should be placed in foster care because DHS says so, or whatever it is. Or whether they are stating what the child wants and may disagree, which is, okay, that's a question. Are you acting in the best interest of the child in your professional judgment? Are you representing what the child wants? There has to be more clarity on that. And there has to be a better education to parents, because, again, what might not happen to me because I'm informed, knowledgeable person and perceived to be that, versus what happens to someone in the exact same situation who is poorly educated, unemployed, and does not have an ability to contact a lawyer or know their rights. And so, the police give Miranda warnings. You are, the subject of a criminal investigation. You have a right to remain silent. You have a right to an attorney, all those type of things. The response given by DHS is that will impede our work. And I think that reveals a very serious problem. It's the gotcha mentality. Our work is to catch you. You knowing your rights, you being able to make decisions or counsel with an attorney is not something we want to have happen, because we are somehow facilitating harm to children. Whereas by not letting people know what their rights are, by coming into the house when they're not allowed to be there, not informing the parents they have a choice, coming late at night when the courts are closed to say it's an emergency when it's not an emergency, all of those are abusive things that do not lead to good. And so the primary thing that we say is that reforms are needed because it ensures that the law is followed. Number two, reforms are needed because we have proven success. The things in our report are not shocking, because this is a problem that has been experienced here in Philadelphia, but across the country. And reforms have been made and proven to be successful, like open courtrooms. If you open up the courtroom, generally the courtroom becomes a better place. People see what's happening, the facilities get better, the level of representation gets better, the advocacy gets better, the parents are able to speak, the children are able to speak, and the results are better. So in many ways, the reforms that we are talking about are proven reforms, certainly agreed to by many experts.
Well, just regarding the courtrooms, and in general, I agree with you, and I think most people would. Just with the case of it being minors,
yes,
is there any concern there about having the open courtroom?
So, for example, when we look at New York, and they went to open courtrooms, people who are opposed to open courtrooms because we're dealing with minors are not. They have been converted to proponents. What has not happened is the names of juveniles and children are made public in the news and all that type of thing. What has happened is better representation, less harm to children, more intact families, and more accountability. And in the worst cases, children are returned to pedophiles. Children are placed with people that they have identified in children's hospitals as persons who have committed sexual assault against them. So in the worst case scenarios, there is a lack of checks and balances that come from the public. And I believe it was, I don't remember what state, but it might have been Rhode Island, but the Supreme Court justice said sunshine is good for children, like casting a light on everything. And so while people originally were concerned, some of them, that having the public come into a courtroom where they're dealing with dependency of juveniles, children, would be harmful, the evidence is that it has been beneficial without the harms, but a improvement in the system.
Okay. And speaking of the court procedure, one of the things that sort of stunned me from the report was that attorneys can be representing both the families and DHS simultaneously. How is that allowed to happen?
So, yeah, that is a problem, right? In other words, I'm not sure how we ended up there. What I can say is that the amount of money that an attorney gets for being a court-appointed representative is minimal. And it may have changed to some extent, but as I recall, and I don't think it's changed much more than this, that an attorney would get like $300 for handling a case for the entire year. Now, you consider the cost of parking, gasoline, all that stuff. it gives reason to believe so many people when they say, I never spoke to my lawyer never showed up, my lawyer showed up, knew nothing about the case, my lawyer showed up, went in court, simply agreed with everything DHS said. That is a huge problem. And so the need to have real legal representation is also one of the reforms that occurred in places like New York City, and a much better circumstance. So I think perhaps because lawyers don't want to do that type of work for the most part, and unfortunately, not all of them, but some of them seem to simply get the check without doing much work. And where they get their work from is from the court. And they may be appointed to cover one issue and another issue. But yeah, it seems as though we have conflicts, and it is throughout the system. It is throughout the system that we find conflicts, in the sense that a lawyer is representing what we would normally think of opposing parties.
And one of the things that the report did was made recommendations, not just for local government, but state government as well. Do you think that you and Councilmember Bass, who also participated in this process, will be introducing any legislation soon?
So, reason why there are recommendations to the state, to the city, and to the agency is that there are three different jurisdictions, if you will. I'm a city councilman, and I can introduce an ordinance or a bill related to city law. However, DHS is an agency that is under the authority of the mayor, who is an executive, but it is also a county entity. In other words, it is subject to state law. And so what it follows is state law. It interprets state law, and then it acts as a county agency. So it's important to get reforms at the state level. That is not something I can do. What I can do is I can send this report and its recommendations to the state Senate, state House, and to the governor's office where it's appropriate. I can send it to the mayor and to DHS and to all related city agencies and departments, and then to each one of my colleagues, and then to start the process of trying to get first state law changed, and if not, doing things that are allowable, by city ordinance. And there are some things that we will not be able to do, but I think the ones that we said we could introduce city ordinances, we can, although we may get resistance from the administration or from DHS itself. So there is also the ability of the executive, be it the governor or the mayor, to do things, many reforms, simply because they say so. And that is the power of being an executive. It may not continue on with the next administration, or it may, but I think those are important things. So we have to hold a hearing, which we will soon. We must have a resolution to hold a hearing to adopt the report. The report was in fact approved by our committee, so that should not be a problem. And after it is adopted, then it will be kind of like the official report. But in the meantime, we are busy creating envelopes and printing the report, and we will distribute it. And then I will follow up by contacting the appropriate state legislators and people in Harrisburg to talk with them about, why these reforms are important. And we'll do the same thing here in City Hall.
Okay, and we'll be waiting for that hearing. So changing gears a little bit, what are your thoughts on the budget process and where we are with that?
So as I've said to you before on and off the air, so to speak. I find the budget process to be very wanting, in the sense that, when people hear budget, they think about like line items and details. We have a very kind of vague process in the city of Philadelphia where the mayor proposes a budget and it passes. However, within that budget is a lot of gray area, or what I would say are misidentified appropriations. And quickly, for example, there may be a department that is in the budget to receive $50 million. But for the last 9 years, after $50 million is appropriated, they come back, the administration, and transfers out $30 million. So the real amount of money that is going to go to that department is $20 million. The $30 million may be used for a variety of other reasons, and they may be important and good reasons, but at the time that the budget is being voted on, I don't know what that $30 million is for. What I can say is, based on the fact that there's no additional hiring, no new mission, no new purchases, and that 9 previous years, $30 million was transferred out and used for other things, I don't believe that $30 million of the 50 is going to be used for what it is purported to be allocated for in the budget. And therefore, I cannot vote for this budget. In other words, budgets are about choices. Are we going to spend $30 million on this? Are we going to spend it on that? What is it? And so I need to know, what is this for? Because maybe I disagree with what the administration is ultimately going to spend it on. Maybe I think there are more important things that it should be spent on. At least I believe that as an elected official on behalf of the people and for the people themselves, they should know what their tax dollars are being allocated for. They may agree or disagree, but it's very vague. You'll find that after we pass a budget at the end of this year, come September, October, the administration is going to come in with transfer ordinances moving $60 or $90 million. Well, that's all from the vague, misidentified things that were passed, where they always intended to move that money out, and obviously for things they don't think the public would approve of. And that is a huge problem for me. So what are we actually funding in the budget? Well, there's things that we know, the money goes to, and those are usually the mundane, kind of like no controversy. You just keep funding L&I to the extent it was funded, fleet to the extent it was funded, the police department to the extent it was funded, and everything else. But in there are some new appropriations, which we can discuss. Maybe I agree, maybe I disagree. Maybe I fight for them, maybe I fight against it. That is as it should be. It's when we have large amounts of money that are not identified, and that is a problem, because now there is no public discourse on what we're trying to do, what we should be doing, and there's no real knowledge by the public on what the choices are that are being made by the mayor and council members. I think that public, kind of discourse on how do we solve our problems, what are most important problems, I think that's important. So all in all, I follow the budget, and I find a lot of it to be misleading, and I try to expose it best I can. And ultimately, I am not really able to expose it, and nor am I satisfied with the budget. And I do think that, baked into the budget are things like tax increases. For example, I believe that, you're estimating that you're going to spend this much money because you're going to increase the real estate tax by X, Y, and Z, whereas I have introduced a bill to basically reject tax increase based on the fact that we did an independent audit of the assessment methodology, and it was found to be below industry standard, which to me means that when especially poor communities are being overassessed, they're being overtaxed, and they cannot pay their real estate taxes, and they will be subject to sheriff's sale, which is, I think, a thing that has happened in the city and has subjected many people to being displaced for reasons that are not justified. Their property is not worth all that much money. They cannot pay it. And they are then subject to being displaced, being pushed out, because the neighborhood is artificially inflated in its cost and its value. And therefore, we end up with very angry people, very upset people, and people who feel the sting of injustice. And in many senses, because they are African American, or they are Hispanic, or they are poor white people, that they are subject to this type of displacement.
So the last thing I'd like to ask you about, council member, we're probably in the best place in terms of the pandemic we've been since it began.
Yes.
Hopefully we're getting very close to the end here. So with that in mind, when we look at the poverty situation in the city, what should the city be doing in order to help get people out of poverty as we move out of the pandemic?
I think the first thing we have to do is make sure people are safe. People cannot go to work. People cannot go to school. People cannot, send their children to school on public transportation, walk down the neighborhood, after school activities. If people are fearful that they're going to get shot or killed or stabbed or robbed. I think it is so important for us to address public safety. We will not get workers wanting to come back to our city. We will not get tourists coming in here to the extent that we need, if we don't get crime under control, make sure our public transportation system is safe and clean. Then it's jobs. We need good jobs. We need the kind of jobs people want. We need jobs that pay well and provide the benefits that people want. Every time we have jobs that do not pay what they should, we have a hard time getting people to take those jobs. We have to deal with the fact that the pandemic has really caused a lot of harm to folks. And there have been some things that have kind of basically stayed off the damage that they are going to endure. But those programs are ending as well. And when we're not careful, again, overspending means that we have less resources for the people who truly need it at the time they need it. And there was a lot of that going on. One of the pervasive problems in this city is education. We have not improved public schools, particularly neighborhood public schools. What we have done is eroded the opportunity that poor children have, poor families have, to get a better level of education. That has been through the deterioration of the selection process in magnet schools. Kids could avoid a poor quality education through the process of applying to magnet schools. And finally, I'd like to say that, one of the most important things we could do in the city that, again, is lacking is we could plan for the future. I think while we have certainly heard important conversations around criminal justice reform, social justice.
Okay, we'd like to thank Councilmember David O for being with us. The entire interview, there's only about 30 seconds left, I think, will be on our newsletter this week, and it'll also be on our YouTube page. Next week, we will be discussing budget, as we have been. We'll have more on OPA, hopefully next week, if not next week, the week after. And we'll be talking about the primary. Lance, thank you so much as always.
Welcome. The primary should be very interesting. It may be the beginning of the end for the Democratic City Committee. We'll see.
We're going to see. It's going to be very fast. It's going to be interesting. So thank you all so much for watching us. Look for our newsletter coming out on Saturday, and we will see you next week.